Welcome to episode 311 of the Game Deflators podcast. My name's John, and I'm joined by Ryan.
Hey, everybody, here at the Game Deflators podcast, we like to talk about games we've recently picked up, games we're currently playing, and we have a bloody good time in this week's Inflation Deflation Challenge.
That might be the quirkiest one you've done so far. And we've done a lot of those. So this week we're going to be chatting about Legacy of Kain. So Blood Omen, Legacy of Kain on the PS1. And then we're also joined by Brian Riggsbee of RetroGameBooks.com. So Brian, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you for having me again.
Definitely appreciate it, man. It was a good time last time, but now Ryan gets to experience it, so it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So before we move on to all my social media spiel, Ryan, what are we going to talk about?
So this week we are going to be talking with Brian about some of his time in game dev, as well as some of the things that he's working on these days. And then we will do our inflation deflation challenge this week on that Legacy of Kain Blood Omen.
Awesome sauce. All right. And you can also, of course, find Game Deflators podcast on the GameDeflators.com, our currently out-of-date website. You can also find us on social media at Game Deflators on X, at The Game Deflators on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads. We're also on YouTube. Hit the little bell so you know when we're on. And go ahead, like, subscribe, leave a comment. We're also on all of those great podcast applications. So go ahead and like, subscribe, and, leave comments on all the podcast apps you listen to. All right, let's dig into it. So first piece we got here is gaming pickups for the week. So for me, I had Little Big Planet 3 on the PS4 that was picked up. Main reason for that is it has been removed from the PlayStation Store. So if you want to get your hands on it, physical moving forward. I do have a digital only copy of that one as well that I got with PlayStation Plus at some point. So not like I didn't have it, but like to have that preservation in place with the physical copy. So it was my one pickup. And then as far as what I'm currently playing, Ryan, I completed Gollum on the PS5.
God, brave soul.
I beat it. So
how'd it go?
Dude, it went for the weirdest turn for Lord of the Rings I've ever seen. So Brian, I assume you're familiar with all of the craziness that's surrounding Gollum and how bad it is. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So it's got some jank. I will say it has it has a lot of jank, a lot of running in place when you're trying to go across things, barriers that are invisible to you. So there was one part where I had to run from orcs and I'm trying to get past. I'm like, why is he not moving past this? It's because there was an invisible wall. Couldn't get past it. So had to jump over that. So beyond the jank, I told you a while back, like, hey, I'm really digging the story. It's not too bad as far as, for an independent story from the rest of Lord of the Rings. And yeah, that I'm kind of being proven wrong on that one. So
who could see that coming?
Yeah, I know. So you get towards when you're with the elves and you're helping out this blind elf named Mel. I've never heard of an elf named Mel. It's a very un-elven name. So you got that going for you. And so you help her out. And at some point you end up back with the elves. And so several weeks pass, whatever it may be. And you're hanging out with the cook of the elves of Mirkwood. And at some point, orcs come in and kill everybody off. And you're up in this giant tree trying to figure out how to get past this random door that we don't really know about too much, right? So orcs come in, you're running from the orcs. And this is where it gets great. So I'm trying to avoid orcs. I get away from them. He's like, all right, I lost them. And then there's elves patrolling. He's like, oh, well, now I got to avoid all the elves and sneak around them. So you sneak around the elves and you get to a point where there's more orcs coming in. An elf shoots one of the candle master who's like leading the orcs. And it's like this mouth of Sauron, basically. And then an elf comes up to you and says, run, Smeagol, run. I'm like, wait, weren't you just trying to catch me? Like, as I was sneaking around, if I got caught, you guys were like, we found you. We're going to go back. But now you're telling me to run? I'm totally confused as to what's happening here. So I run away from those orcs. We get into the final area, and there's like this purple haze that they talk about. Pun intended, I guess, right? So there's this purple haze, and there's like this random floating orb. And somehow we go through like these secret doors, and we're captured by like this orc master and such. And he's like, oh, you have to, open the door for us. So we say an elven word to open a door, and we're like, quick, let's go. We'll leave him behind. I'm like, that makes no logical sense because you just blurted out the word. So couldn't they just repeat the same word to get in? That just doesn't click. So so we make our way in, and at the very tail end, there's like this giant orb, and the riddle, or not the riddle master, the Candleman, essentially starts talking in black speech to get Sauron to rise from this. And I'm like, where does this, like, I've never seen anything like this in Lord of the Rings, like this random glowing orb floating above a well of purple haze, and this random dude who's not canon in any sort of form is trying to raise Sauron out of, like, it did not click story wise. And the best part is when you get to the very end is two elves making out and Gollum just looking at him saying, so is Gollum free to go now? As they're making out. I'm like, what's happening?
What?
Yeah. So if you're interested in what I've just talked about, you can watch the playthrough on our YouTube.
I
And
might
just
have to watch this last part just to
just-
see what is happening here.
It was so rough. So my wife actually, we were playing that one together, and she fell asleep probably about an hour and a half with it left in the playthrough. And so after I finished it up, I'm like, yeah, you missed a whole lot. She's like, it's okay. I didn't like it anyways. So I had to suffer through it to beat it, and she got to sleep through it all.
There you go.
Yeah, so to kind of help recoup the lost IQ that came from playing that game, we're now playing Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. So that's the game that we're
Okay.
playing, and we knocked out about an hour of that last night. So there you go. There's my playthrough and what I'm playing. Ryan, you can go next, and we'll pass it over to Brian.
All right, so this week for my pickup, I finally managed to get my hands on the Lego Nightmare Before Christmas set. It's, I don't know. I don't understand why it's only available in Lego stores and not just at like Target and stuff. So it came out in September. I call occasionally just to see if they have any, because they'll like hold it for you until the mall closes if they do. And I just never really got lucky or, had an opportunity very often. So I had Friday off. I called in Thursday to see if they thought they would be getting any. And they were like, yeah, we should be getting one in. And I was like, okay, sweet. Can I call in to have you guys hold it? And they're like, well, only after 10:30. Like if anybody's at the door, like they can get it. I was like, okay, cool. So I had that day off. I went down to the mall like early. I was there like 15 minutes before they opened, standing outside the Barnes and Noble, just me. And then like a couple other people come up, few other people come up. I'm like, there's probably like 6-7 people out here. I'm like, what else is going on today? I'm trying to see if there's like game releases or anything. Cause I'm like, they can't, somebody here might be here for the same reason I am. And there was this young dude, sure enough, who like, I kind of saw him. He came up second. And then like, as soon as the Barnes and Noble employees were like coming to open the door, I just like barely managed to squeeze through past him. Like he was kind of like booking it, power walking. I was like trying my best to keep up without like looking like an obnoxious idiot or something.
Well, you're
So
in your
I'm
30s,
like,
so you also want to pull a muscle as well.
yeah, I mean, he's like probably in his like young 20s. And I'm like, I take a right around like these blocks of books while he goes left. And we kind of like managed to just both get to the Lego store, like just as the guy's coming up to open the door. But there's some older guy and like a little girl in there. I don't know. Maybe somebody opened another door to the mall like a little bit early. I don't know. They were outside and I was like, hey, you guys were here first. Like, did you guys want to go? And they were just like, oh, no, that's fine. So we both go into the store at like the same time, me and this kid. And then he's rookie mistake. He's like looking, scanning the walls. I go straight to the back to the register and I'm like, hey, yo, I called in yesterday. You said you were getting one of those nightmare sets. You got it? I was like, boom, secured it.
It's like
This
when
is
George
like-
Costanza like hid the jacket and beat the other guy from buying it. If anyone remembers, that's like classic move. Pretty great.
That's
I know, like I've
Brian's
never had
Costanza
one of those
moment.
like racing for the Christmas toy kind of moments before, but it was a little bit thrilling. It was a little bit fun. I felt a little bit bad edging out this young guy, but like, I went to the Einstein later and I made sure to hold the door extra long open for this couple to go out with their strollers, just keep paying it forward. I get one of those occasionally.
It would be bad as if the dad and the little daughter were also going for that set and they're like, no,
Well,
it's okay.
I would have
you go
let
first.
them like, that's why I asked, like, if they were like standing there before we even got to the door, like, I'm not about to do that. But being this kid, we knew what the game was.
No, I know that, but I'm just saying, like, they were like, no, it's okay. You go first, and then you get the Lego set, and they're like, oh well, damn, like that's what we were gonna get too. So, well,
So that was my pickup of my story time, and then I haven't been playing much this week. My friend had an interesting wedding last night. It was really cool. Like they've had, I guess, kind of a wedding sort of for her that was more of like a private event, and then they had kind of more of like a reception where everybody came to down here, and on like half of the venue they set up like their TVs from home and a like big projector and asked me to bring a TV and like my SNES and PS1 classics and stuff. So we were like chilling playing games half the night. So that was kind of fun. I played some Nidhogg, some Ridge Racer 4, some Mario Kart, some Street Fighter 2. I had the PS1 classic setup, and this little kid, he must have been like 9 or something. He came over and he's like, "Oh, what's this?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, this is great. This is the PS1. This is like all games from the 90s." And he like looks at the controller and sets it down and goes back over to the like Switch where all the other kids are. I was like, "You don't know. No appreciation."
oh man, that's your preservation PS1, right?
Yeah.
No.
So that was that's what I've been up to. What about you, Brian? Any recent pickups or things you're currently playing?
Yeah, I went on a bit of an eBay bender, which happens sometimes. You look for one thing and then you come home with 5 things. I don't do it very often, so I feel like I'm allowed to do it. So I'm trying to do a bit of a PS1 kick right now. I picked up Parasite Eve, Alundra, Strider 2, Vagrant Story, and Ghost in the Shell, and I probably paid more money than I should for these things, but again, I don't do it very often. I got a PS2 Slim. They're all kind of sitting there. I was reminded that you needed a PS1 memory card to save on a
Yeah.
PS2 when you're playing PS1 games. So then it set me back another few days. Got that kind of set up. But then my copy of Echoes of Wisdom arrived, the Zelda game. It's still in the shrink wrap. So I also haven't played that yet. You know, I've heard some mixed things about it. I'm not here to judge it because I haven't played it yet. I'm just kind of waiting to get to it. But what I have been playing is the Silent Hill 2 remake, and I'm completely enthralled with this game. It's I was a little worried, the studio that was making it, there was some, grumblings about like, do they have the right track record for it? But I think it's like incredible. I think they did a knockout job with this game. I'm almost done with it, so I can't really say how I will ultimately feel. I played the original, but only for a day or two, so like a few hours back when it originally was out because I was borrowing it from a friend. And at the time, I thought this is strange and interesting and fairly unique. The combat's a little janky, but that's okay. But I didn't get far enough. I did read the boss fight books about Silent Hill 2, the Mike Drucker books, which is excellent. And so like that's how I really learned about the series and like what it's all about. But anyway, it's an excellent game. I'm really enjoying it.
Which one do you want to see them like remake next if you had a choice?
For Silent Hill?
Yeah.
Well, I number 3 and what was it? The Room, was that
The Room.
4?
Yeah.
I'm like I'm a big Resident Evil fan, but Silent Hill, I'm really kind of like it's hard for me to piece it together. I kind of mix up the movie or the movies like with the games. The Room one, like to me, like conceptually was really interesting. I would
Mhm.
like to see that done. Like just this concept of like you're trapped in this room, how to get here, what's really going on in my life, am I trying to escape, am I trying to stay, I'm in the other world. I mean, like to me that was really interesting. I only got to play the beginning of that as well, so I would love to see a remake of that.
Yeah, I
They're
knocked
working
that
on a
one.
couple new ones, aren't they?
I don't remember.
I remember they had that like girl like floating in the kimono with like the mushrooms on her face.
There's
Oh,
something that's
yeah.
like
And then
there's
that's
something.
true. They did have that one. It's going to be great. It's like set in Japan, and then they have the free one, which I think chapter 2 came out. So you and I need to play that, Ryan. The second chapter for
Okay.
the free one. The Room, I actually beat years ago, and I really enjoyed that one as well. Like the overall concept of it. It's not as favorable for most people for whatever reason. I'm not sure why, but I really did enjoy that one myself. So cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump into some questions here. So you have some. Well, I guess if you want to give a little intro or your background
Yeah.
on the gaming side of things, then we can load up with some questions here.
Yeah, I'll give you the short or medium story. So when I was in college in Santa Cruz, I was pizza delivery driver, working, going through school, all that good stuff. I had a few friends who were working at a video game company doing QA, quality assurance, which is often the entry point. And they said, hey, they got room for someone. They got me an interview and I got in. At the time, it was contract work, which is still the case, I think, for a lot of QA people. So, they need you for a few months. They don't need you for a month, which is kind of nice when you're going through school. But as soon as I finished, they're like, hey, here's your contract. School's done. Let's get you signed. Let's get you on salary. And they made me the QA lead and also their customer support lead, which is hilarious because it was for this really small game that no one really cared about. So that's how it all started. I ended up, doing some other QA gigs. I ended up moving into production. Being a producer is kind of like a project manager for people that aren't super familiar. Gaming they use a lot of film terminology. And then I worked as a game designer as well. So some traditional game design like pen and paper, but also, placing characters, animations, working with the animators and engineers to coordinate how everything's going to click together, the meta game, as well as like mini games, depending on what we were working on. Some, flash animations, for some UI stuff. Like you do a little bit of everything. And so this was about 2003 and then through about 2012, 11. So it was about a 9-year thing for me.
Nice. Yeah, it's a good experience there.
Mm-hmm.
So last time we had you on, you and I were chatting and you had mentioned that you were waiting on a PSP to come in. Have you booted that up at any point? Any games you played through it?
Yeah. So a friend gave it to me, which is with some games, which is really cool when you have friends that do those kind of things. It's one of those, it can't hold a charge, so you got to keep it plugged into the wall. So it's not really a portable. I used to own a PSP, but it actually was stolen at one of the gaming companies. Someone broke in one night and stole a bunch of stuff from people, and they took my PSP and what few games I had at the time. So I played recently Me and My Katamari and just dabbled in it because I'd already kind of played those games. But I also played Silent Hill Origins, which is kind of funny because it's the first Silent Hill game I ever completed. And it's not like the greatest Silent Hill game. The story is kind of trash, to be honest. But it's fun. It's interesting. Like it has a lot of the concepts that I'm now experiencing in the remake of 2. So it's kind of interesting to have that compare and contrast. But it was fun. I still have a bunch I haven't gotten to yet that were, the ones that were given to me I have Loco Roco 2 and Patapon, something. What it's called.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Patapon. There's a couple of those.
Yeah.
So
that's catchy, that one.
Yeah, I'm excited for those. I have Third Birthday, which is like the unofficial trilogy to Parasite Eve, but I'm going to play those all in order.
Okay.
For what it's worth. I'm sure they're going to degrade in value over time, but I'll do the trilogy for fun.
Yeah, when you started name dropping those PS1 games, I'm like, ooh, that's a hefty bill right there. I think Alundra alone is like $100-something now, right?
It's the only thing I treat myself on. I swear, I don't buy shoes. I don't do anything for myself.
Yeah, kind of same thing here. No new clothes, anything like that. It's just video games and magic cards. Have you had you play Alundra before, by the way, before we dive into the next thing?
Yeah.
No, I know there's like some kind of loose connection to some like games before it that I have played. Like it kind of has like that Landstalker kind of vibe to it, like like which was kind of playing off of some Zelda type games as well. But no, it's just one of those ones where I remember seeing the ads for it and the marketing for it back in the day and just loving the artwork. It looked great, but I didn't own a PS1. I was one of those, like I went straight to PS2. Everyone wanted a DVD player and all the, it had great games. I mean, but I never went back to it. So this is me trying to relive those moments I missed.
Well, I just recently beat it for the first time, and we had about 6 months of talking about my pain through that. Fantastic story. I'll say it's a great story, but the platforming, extremely difficult platforming in my experience. So I would just say, keep an open mind, but I think the story was really good.
I hear the sequel is bad to be avoided. Yes, and I heard the first one, the dungeons overstay their welcome. That's as much as I've looked into it.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So you'll like it though. It's overall, It's pretty good. Yeah.
We've also played that Ghost in the Shell game for the podcast. That was a fun one. I was showing that to a friend last night, actually.
Yeah, that one. I played a little bit already just to kind of like try it out. And it's like, I remember thinking like, oh, you're in that like rover, whatever the thing's called,
Mhm.
like that mech suit.
The
And I was like,
Tachikoma.
really? Like that's going to be the whole game? But it's actually really cool. And it's pretty
It's pretty
intuitive
cool.
too. It's great when
And
you
the
can go back to an
controls feel
old
neat
game
when
and
you're,
just
like,
control
in
it.
the tunnels.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels good when you're moving around in that thing.
Yeah, I do remember that one was pretty fun when we played it. Yeah, my copy on that one is, I'm sure, did you get complete in box for all these, or are you doing loose disc?
They are complete. So yes, I can be shamed on that as well.
The way to
No,
do
not
it.
at all,
No,
dude.
that's proper.
No, that's the proper way to do it, for sure. Like, my copy, I didn't want to shell out for, because I had a loose disc I picked up when I worked in a game store. So owner at the time was just like, hey, here, take it. I don't, it's whatever. I think it was like 10, 15 bucks at the time. And
Oh, nice.
yeah, so it wasn't bad. Now it's obviously more than that, but I ended up having to get a repro cover and a repro back insert for it. So I kind of wish
Mm.
it was complete, but it's quite a bit. So
And
It
it
still
has some
looks
really cool anime in it as well, which is
oh yeah, for sure.
a perk.
Yeah, definitely. Brian?
Yeah. So these days you've been working on your books. We love the SNES map book, the volume 1 that you did. You were really nice to invite us to be able to kind of write some inserts in there. And I feel really grateful to be able to have written something for Earthbound Mother 2. I love that game. And just going through that book and seeing how everything's laid out and just like the crispness of the visuals on everything, like that is really an amazing thing to look through. So I definitely wanted to bring that up, just kind of see how the reception's been to that and see if there's anything that you can share with us on volume 2 for that project.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you first and foremost for contributing and for the kind words. There's a lot of work that goes into these things, as you can imagine. And I'm really proud this is the first hardcover that we've put together. A lot of the projects I work on with people, they're some form of collaboration, right? At least there's, commissioned artists for covers, editing that goes into these things, writing some, guest artwork, those kind of things. But the quotes being mixed in there, I feel like added an extra level of depth to the book. So like people could put their own individual insights. So it's not just, me and a few other people kind of saying how they feel about these games and the maps as a major theme. So yeah, I mean, it's beautiful. I'm super happy about it. It is going to be 3 volumes just because of the breadth of it all, right? It's just too big. Even with a hardcover, you want it to lay flat. You know what I mean? Like it would have been 900 plus pages if it was one thing, which is insane. So it's about 300 each. Yeah, who knows? Maybe a compendium kind of thing later could happen. But yeah, the reception's been really great. Everything keeps exceeding my expectations. Kind of a weird fun fact is, I put out the digital version out for free, and that's gonna be done at the end of October. It'll not be free anymore. But it's been downloaded over 1 million times, which is like kind of insane to me. But
That's
people
awesome.
like free things, so
Yeah.
I'm not surprised, I guess. Also, I'm happy about it. And then with volume 2, so it's actually almost done. It'll go into production pretty soon. I'm just wanting to put some extra things together. So these are chronological as far as like the games in there. So it'll be Fire Emblem through Secret of Evermore. So some of the hits people might be familiar with are Harvest Moon, Illusion of Gaia, lots of different Kirby games. You have Legend of Mystical Ninja in there. Of course, A Link to the Past, Lufia 1 and 2, some Mega Man X games, Rock and Roll Racing, and the Romancing Saga series. So there's about 70 games in total. Just like before, the quotes, modern artists lending some of their work in there. There'll be an interview and multiple articles. The cover will be A Link to the Past. If you're watching this on video right now, you can actually see, wrong thumb, the actual oil painting that was made for it. So this time it wasn't a digital piece. So the artist commission, her name's Marianne Cluth. She did this painting. It's kind of a mashup. Probably hard to see in the video, but you'll see it very soon once it gets out the door. So that's going to look great. And then we'll have notebooks and everything else that's like kind of themed off of this image. We have, the quotes themselves for people that aren't familiar. They come from, podcasters like yourselves, some former game devs, including some people I used to work with. There's artists, writers, comedians. Heather Ann Campbell, for example, is one of the people that's going to be in the next book talking about one of her favorite games. Just a lot of people I respect and appreciate their insights on. And then there's going to be like a fun interactive thing at the end. I don't want to spoil it. It's like something I'm prototyping right now. It's going to be kind of a novelty of sorts, but I won't
Cool.
spoil it. You'll see.
Sounds fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be keeping an eye on that, and I'm also kind of curious if you're gonna have. You mentioned compendium, right? Like maybe an exterior cover to slot all 3
Mm,
books in. So
that could work.
just a
All right,
thought.
we're gonna have to pay you for. We're gonna round that up to an hour for your contribution on that one. You're gonna have to bill me.
I
Maybe.
wanted to ask.
I think we had on our Crystal interview similar situations. Like you could do this, and they're like, "That's actually a great idea. Let's put
It
it
is a
in."
great idea, though. I love that idea.
I wanted to ask kind of as a follow-up, like what gave you kind of the direction for the emphasis on maps? Because I think that that's something that like really does connect games and does really give games their own like real flavor, but it's something that kind of is in the background a little bit.
Right. Yeah. So, not all, but the majority of the things that I'm doing a lot of the production design work on for these books are fairly unique. I mean, sure, they're tying back to old retro games and themes in some way. That's not unique, but I mean, like the take that we put on these things. So the map theme in general feels fairly fresh. Like the History of Rygar book, maybe not the most popular game ever produced, but no one had ever gone deep on that game in book form. And so that's why that was the first thing I tackled. The pixel art Metroid thing, it's like, yeah, people have been doing modern pixel art for games, but like, has anyone ever seen 125 artists in an art gallery? Like, I want to do things that I want to have on my own coffee table and that feel fairly unique in some way. And so with the map series, we've done NES, Genesis, and now this 3-volume SNES series that's in production. It's just, I've just always been drawn to like, I mean, cartography in games, probably not outside of games so much. Sure, we all use Google Maps and MapQuest before that, but that's like a necessity. But within games, like you feel like it deepens the adventure, it expands the world, it gives you something to look forward to. It always shows you there's something around the corner, right? And it's always presented in a different way depending on the genre or the medium, right? And so I just love this idea of exploration, but also the art of these maps, like especially if you go back to like the 90s where a lot of these things were hand drawn. You had like a lot of Japanese magazines where things were like people use markers to color in their hand drawings, or they stitch together screenshots and then would have to kind of manipulate them in a way to kind of reconstruct something. Like to me, that's just, there's a lot of joy in that. And so, some people ask me like, are these guidebooks? And no, they're not guidebooks, right? Like, sure, you could look at some of this stuff and you could put it side by side and play a game and get something out of it, but that's not the intention of it. It's more to be a curated celebration of maps and gaming as like a theme, and taken console by console, and so that's what I'm doing. I just want to appreciate this type of art form.
So going into your prior life in the gaming industry, what was one of the favorite gaming projects that you were able to work on professionally?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. My career went from working on first person shooters and MMORPGs, which were really kind of cool, like uh Medal of Honor games. We worked on Star Trek Online and a game that probably no one ever remembers, Gods and Heroes. But those FPS games were like that's what I was playing at home, like different types of FPS games. So to me, I'm like, I can't believe I'm doing this at work. It was kind of like the cliche commercial about like, do you want to be a game designer or a QA tester or whatever? And it's like, it's glorified. It's like this unrealistic thing, but it actually felt like that in the early years. But then over time, I started working on games for like 11-year-old girls. And I'm glad that those games are made, especially to bring more girls and women into gaming, I think is a great thing. But I'm not personally like excited about them, right? Like you're not designing for yourself. And that's a lot of our jobs are like that, right? Like we're not necessarily producing things for ourselves. What I'm trying to say is that like over time, as my career progressed, the games I worked on were not as interesting to me personally. So it's kind of an interesting kind of crossfade. So to answer your question, it really was the beginning that was like the most fun, exciting moment, because we would, and now that I'm like talking about the good old days, like we would come in, you'd all have your level assigned for you in Medal of Honor, and you would run through, you basically like, it's like your smoke test, like something changed over, in the last 24 hours. When there's smoke, there's fire. Let's find it. Maybe report a few bugs while you're at it. An hour goes by, you're done. And then we play multiplayer for the rest of the day. And somehow we had the steam in us to actually do that. Take a long lunch, play some more. It was really fun. I mean, because multiplayer games don't really get old unless they're bad multiplayer games. They exist, but these games are good enough. And then we would create our own rules, like bolt action rifles only, kind of thing. Just to try to like make it a little more interesting. It was a lot of fun. And I mean, you're sitting in a room. It's like basically a LAN party, right? You got like 12 people in this room, all just playing together. You're mixing up teams. You're giving feedback to the developers about like what's actually fun about it and why. And they actually are interested in that feedback because this is your audience. Plus you're seeing it kind of progress as you go along. You're like, oh wow, that building was just like a block before, but look at it now, right? It's kind of interesting to see it grow and grow as you go through it. So that would be it for me. It would be the old Medal of Honor. It was Pacific Assault, and then we did an expansion called Breakthrough. So those were the back-to-backs there.
Yeah, I remember those old games too. I used to play, I forget which one it came out on the GameCube. There was a few. I think, was it Frontline? No, it wasn't Frontline. I don't know. There was one, it was like World War II focused. I think that a lot of them are anyways. But my brother and I used to do that, and it was just the two of us playing multiplayer when we were younger. And it was still a lot of fun just playing without bots, just the two of us trying to snipe each other out in that game. And of course, cheating by looking at each other's screens. So yeah, good time. Those are great games back then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the memory I have of Medal of Honor is I hooked my big like stereo speakers up to like the AV instead, so it wasn't coming through just like the TV audio, and nobody else was home. And my friend went outside into the driveway, and we tried to see if we could crank the volume up loud enough that it sounded like gunshots, like outside of the house, like idiots.
It was Frontline. I just looked it up. So yeah, that was my memories. Let's see. So next one.
Yeah. So you've had a number of roles and you've worked on a good number of games. When did you get out of development? Like, what was going on in the industry at that time?
Yeah, it's interesting. I reflect on this every now and then, especially because I still know a lot of people that work in gaming. Most of the people I used to work with, they ended up at all kinds of different places, because gaming companies would collapse all the time. That's still happening today, and it's really happening a lot right now. So it's really top of mind. But most of those people have moved on to other things. They either went into tech or just something totally different, right? So most people moved on to different things. So I still stay in touch with people that are still in the industry. Like I have like one friend that went from Capcom to Bethesda, and he kind of tells me like what that's like. And these are some of the people I mentioned that are in the book. But yeah, it's just I was at a company. You work really hard. Sometimes you're working a lot of overtime. Like that's no joke. Like that happened back then. It happened before me. It happened after me. Sleeping under your desk sometimes when you're 22, you don't really care so much. But when you start to get a little older, it starts to kind of get at you. You have a life, you have a family, etc. So that was starting to bother me a little bit. But then what would really bother me is that you're building up to something and you want to be able to put something out the door and then celebrate it. And you do, but that celebration is often very short-lived. And again, I just want to, caveat with saying like, I can't relate to what's happening to people today. I just think it's similar. This is just my situation. And you'd celebrate and then you're like, oh no, we need something else to do. Actually, it's more of like now you switch to panic mode. What's the next thing we're going to do? Let's start pitching, right? Especially if you're a third-party studio, which is what I often worked with. Let's get the next job. You're trying to overlap and work on something else at the same time. That's often the case, but you don't know if that thing's going to keep getting funded. Sometimes the company's self-funding it and they're looking for a publisher. Are they going to get it or not? You got to keep grinding because you got to make that thing presentable, right? It's for investors, etc. And so what happened is my first company went under. And then I moved on to the next company and we worked on the next game, which was Gods and Heroes. And then we're about to get that out the door. I won't get too into the details, but we couldn't get it done. There was basically some engineering issues that we couldn't get past. And this is an MMORPG, so it's like, you can imagine the stakes are even higher. It's more complicated. They ended up selling off the game. The company folded. Then I'm going to the next place, and now I'm at the third place. We get the few games out. We're not getting our pitches accepted. At that point, I didn't want to wait for the third company to collapse. I decided to just make a shift myself. So the culture wasn't exactly what I wanted. The pay is not great, at least for me. The job security, as I'm speaking to, was definitely not great, right? And again, you're getting older, you guys start thinking about those things. And so that's why I made a switch. I figured that if I could still do something with gaming in my spare time, which I was already doing in parallel with those jobs, like kind of working on things at night, making my own Counter-Strike maps, and later a Left 4 Dead 2 campaign. If I could entertain myself in that way, regardless if it could be monetized, because those were not, at least I could fulfill my creative side and do something, even if it was slightly less creative. So that's kind of how I balanced it out. And then that third company I mentioned ended up being bought out, and then the majority of the staff was laid off. So it essentially was, you can almost call it like a collapse in that sense. Yeah.
So, I know you're on the out now, but kind of looking in to the industry as it is today and the turmoil that surrounds it. Do you think things are heading in a bad direction for the gaming industry in terms of development? And are there any positives that you can kind of take from it right now?
I mean, I'll start with like what I think, at least as an outsider, appears as a positive, which is like the unions that are starting to pop up. Like that was like barely even a concept at the time. People weren't even talking about it. And I was too young to even really rationalize it. I remember being at that last company and talking, like, first, I should mention, this last company was only 35 people. It was a tiny studio, right? Everyone obviously knew each other really well. And I remember talking to a few of the artists and saying like, hey, if we're not getting raises every couple of years, like, or a year or so, like even at minimum, we're kind of getting a pay decrease because there's inflation. Like, doesn't that bother you? And I kind of realized later I was trying to work towards some form of collective bargaining, but on a very small scale. And I remember kind of, sitting with the creators or the founders of the company and saying like, hey, I need a little more money. This is why. And like, they just, they didn't want to entertain it, but I don't think they had the money to give, to be honest. Like, I can't say for sure, but like, it just wasn't a good situation for everyone. So, I really hope that with the unions that are starting to sprout up, or at least the discussions around it, I hope that ends up having a positive impact. I really, really do. I think it's important. The things I worry about are just, again, like just the parallels I still see. Like when you hear, when you read a book or read an article about like some really negative cultural stuff that happens with a company. I didn't experience any of those things. I'm lucky. Like, things like harassment and like just like the top down like negativity. I never experienced any of those things. I feel lucky. Like I worked with actually like really cool, great people. That was my experience. But it, I remember hearing about that stuff at the time. Sounds like it's still happening. It's pretty ugly. I have no idea what the pay is like today. I hope people are getting compensated better, but I'm really worried that they're not.
Yeah.
Brian?
I mean, you've already kind of talked through like some of like the peaks and valleys of working in dev. I mean, what are kind of some of those like higher points? I feel like we've been kind of focusing a lot on like some of the more negative aspects, but I mean, you had fun playing the LAN parties and stuff, but what else was a good time?
Yeah, I mean, and I should say the overwhelming majority of it was really positive. Sure, there were late hours, low pay, like no bonuses and all that kind of stuff, but I was working on video games, and I much rather have been doing that than all these other different pathways I might have ended up going down. Like, so thematically, even if it was High School Musical or Hannah Montana games, which is what I did design for, like I should still feel lucky that I'm doing cool digital, design work. I'm creating something. I'm still solving interesting problems. Like, okay, let's work with the animator. Like, should we cut some frames out of that? We have to, we're having a debate now. Is it about like the quality of the animation or the gameplay, right? Because fun usually is like the more weighted factor. Let's get like the creative director in here to weigh in on it. Like, it's kind of fun to solve those problems. And it's probably true today, where it's like you're just figuring out these things as you go along. There is no like big waterfall plan. You hear about the giant like game design document, the GDD, that like people create at the beginning. Publishers usually require them. That's what we would do back then. But like ultimately, you're testing things out. You're experimenting. You're trying, and like having a job where you get to experiment is actually a lot of fun, right? Sure, there's pressure, but it is fun along the way. The people I worked with, they're still some of my favorite people in this world. There's some of the people I've collaborated with on some of these retro game books projects. I'm really happy I know them. I got to see some like really cool art being created along the way, like some really cool like concepts that never happened. Like we were pitching a Tron game back when Tron Legacy, the movie, was in production. I really, really wish we got to work on that. We had actually some amazing ideas. So it's a little unfortunate, but yeah, I mean, we had a lot of fun too. And also it's just often like a very like goofy environment, like it is a cliche, but yeah, people were shooting each other with Nerf guns, like putting Street Fighter figurines in their cubicle. Like those things happen and they're kind of cool, kind of fun. And so I do miss a lot of the fun parts about it as well.
Makes sense. So I didn't have this plan initially, but in the work that you had done years ago, was there like, what was the longest period of time one of those games took? I mean, a year, 2 years, like on average, how long were you working on a title?
The longest one was at Perpetual Entertainment, defunct, obviously, on Gods and Heroes, Rome Rising. I was at that company for 3.5 years, and that's the one that started a little before I joined and ended a little bit after the company sold it off and kind of, folded in on itself like a dying star. So pretty long.
Yeah. So tail end of the interview process here, a couple icebreaker questions that we could have had at the beginning. When playing games, do you find yourself more drawn towards large video games, AAA titles, or more small indie titles?
So I'm someone who likes variety. When I'm playing a game, I try to stick with it all the way to the end, unless it's so bad I have to give up. But I like to do like one game at a time, one movie at a time, one TV show at a time if I can. And I like to change things up in terms of genres and, retro versus modern. So I mentioned Silent Hill 2. I played Elden Ring and the expansion recently. So good. So incredible. But I also want to play retro games that I'm either revisiting or maybe playing for the first time that I somehow missed. Like I played Mega Man 3 recently, just like in an afternoon. I played so much Mega Man 1 and 2, but somehow never played 3 and played, the subsequent titles as well. Mega Man 3, excellent game. I also played Portal recently. It's kind of funny. I played it on my Switch, which feels like my old PC self would have been like, what are you doing? You cannot play that on a non-PC device. Like this is blasphemy. A little hard at times because of it, but it doesn't require a lot of precision. Such a great game. I understand now what everyone's talking about. And then like sometimes I like to play new games that are in like a retro style, and I'm so happy that's still happening. So Animal Well and Dave the Diver were the two most recent in that kind of subcategory. Really, really fun games. But yeah, I mean, like I said, like those PS1 games I had, like I'm really looking forward to Metroid Prime 4 and the Dragon Quest 3 remake. Like I do everything. I like cozy. I like action. I like survival horror. I just, like we said before we started recording, I try to stay away from true multiplayer games. Like actually the way I should put it is I try to stay away from games that don't have an ending because that's where the addiction sets in. They are some of the best games, but they're also really hard to say no to. So about the last 10 years, I've kind of stuck with single player. Elden Ring is like where I will go a little farther, right? There's a little multiplayer, but it has an end. Like I'm going to do all this stuff. I'll be done eventually.
Yeah, that's one I need to get into, the Erd Tree. I think it is the
Shadow
DLC.
of the Erd Tree.
Shadow of the Erd Tree. Yeah, I haven't messed with it yet, but I hear it's essentially a whole other game. Like given the amount of content.
Big. Yeah. And also without getting too deep into this, like instead of it being kind of like horizontally big, it has verticality to it. You've probably heard like you look at the map and you're like, it's not so big. And then you realize how vertical this world is. It's incredible. And then how that all connects adds, to the gameplay itself.
Yeah, definitely what I need to jump into. I haven't deleted my Elden Ring data from the PS5 just to, just because I knew DLC would come out at some point. I would make my way back to it.
Nice.
So, Ryan, I guess the last question here, right?
Yeah. So to wrap it up, if you only had one game that you could keep playing for the rest of your life, what you got?
So I'm going to assume like I'm living in some weird parallel dimension where I don't have responsibilities with my family and my kid and work stuff, etc. And then in doing so, break my rule about the never ending game because this is the only game I can play for the rest of my life. So I need it to be never ending. Like I hear people say things like, oh, it'd be Final Fantasy VI or whatever. It's like, I've played those kind of games multiple times, but I don't want to play them for the rest of my life. So it would have to be something perpetual, something with like no ending. So I would go back to Counter-Strike. I was a big Source player at 1.6 before. I know there's Global Offensive, I think it's called. It's so funny. Like I put out a map for it, but I also like never played it just because I just wanted to, whatever. That's what happened. But it would be that. It's familiar, and I never had a bad time playing that game, no matter who I was playing with, if I knew them or not. Never had a bad time.
Nice. Back to comfort.
Yeah, and you're right on that too. Most times, if we ask that question, it's always their favorite game, right? And to your point, if you had to play it the rest of your life, you're talking years and years, and that game just gets shorter and shorter every time because you know what to do, right? So it makes sense to play something like that. I think for me, if I was to take that same approach, it would be something like an Apex Legends or one of the Halo games with some multiplayer going on it. Yeah. Cool. Well, dude, we definitely appreciate having you on this week. Great time, as always. Do you want to go ahead and let people know where to find those books and social media handles and all that good stuff?
Yeah, and thanks for having me. So you can find us at retrogamebooks.com, at Retro Game Books on most social platforms. As I mentioned, we got lots of books, also some new notebooks coming out soon. And then sometimes we have some fun things like wax packs and stickers and all that kind of extra goodies. For anyone in Australia or France and you don't want to pay international shipping, we actually have some retailers selling our books there now. So you can look for those. We're going to also start appearing in some physical stores. So we have some wholesale orders coming in some different parts of the US. And then we have a new book coming out early next year that is being written by Nadia Oxford. People may be familiar with her as a games journalist, Retronauts, Axe of the Blood God podcast personality. So she's almost done writing that, and then we'll edit and get it out there. And then there's one more unannounced book that I will save for later. That is not by me, it's by another author as well.
So a lot of good things coming down the pipe.
Always working on too many things at the same time because life is too short. Let's do it.
Yep. Totally feel it, man. Good stuff. Well, again, thanks for coming on, and we'll definitely be talking to you pretty soon in the near future.
Cool. Thanks again.
Yep. Thanks so much.
All right. So after that little intermission, going to go ahead and start up with our inflation deflation for the week. It was great having Brian on to give his perspective on the game industry. But now it's time for some Blood Omen Legacy of Kain on the PlayStation 1. So this game was developed by Silicon Knights. It was published by Crystal Dynamics. It was designed by Seth Karras, Armando Marini, and Ken McCullough. I got that one before you tried to correct me on it. It was released in November of 1996. It is an action adventure game with reception around an 8 out of 10. So
for the Legacy of Kain, while traveling, Kain, as a man, is ambushed and killed by assassins. Upon waking in the afterlife, he is offered a chance to seek his revenge. You return to Earth as a vampire and shortly deal with those that slew you. But the necromancer, Mortanius, who brought you back, voices out to you, letting you know that though you have killed them, they are not the true hand behind your fate. From there, you set out to find your path of vengeance and take on the world as a powerful creature of the night. So it was a fun game.
Yeah, it was definitely fun, and I need to continue playing it, actually. I did have a good time, and it's one that has been recommended to me on several occasions that I jump into it and, heard a lot of good things, right? An 8 out of 10, I think, is definitely true in this aspect. So for me, I think I know we'll get into the gameplay and all that in a moment, but just the one thing that I want to point out here is I'm pretty sure, not having looked into the history of it, I want to say this was a PC type game. Like it was on PC first and ported over to PS1. I want to make that assumption just based on how it's laid out. And then also that movement on the screen. Like whenever you go left to right, like things
Nope.
shift. No, it
Came
wasn't.
out on PlayStation a year before Microsoft Windows.
And then it went over to PC. That's so interesting, man, because just the way that it's like that
It has that
plays,
legacy.
yeah, it just makes you feel like it's a PC port for whatever reason. But I mean, besides that, I did find it to be a great game overall. I mean, the entire concept of, the overall feel of the mechanics of slashing enemies was great. Sucking blood from definitely like people just kind of chained up was pretty crazy. And I really like the voice acting on this, even though it has like that gnarly, like old sound to it, just given when it was released. I really thought it was good for like what we were playing.
Well, and it does such a level beyond what you would usually associate with this time era. Not only is there a lot of, like voice dialogue throughout the game, but you go into the menus and you get like narrated descriptions of the items and things as well. The UI is very heavy in this game too. Like it really has that kind of taking up space as a part of the gameplay. It's not just kind of like blended in like you see in like modern day UI. It's like its own pane on the screen and very reminiscent of like older kind of like dungeon crawling RPGs where you'd have like your commands and things and your map in the corner and stuff. But it's certainly so it's an action adventure that's broadly descriptive. It's like an isometric kind of that 3/4 on perspective where you're running around hacking and slashing in real time. You've got like items and magic that you can only have like one of equipped at a time, and you need to go in and change those. There's all kinds of spells and forms and things that you will get throughout the game. We didn't really make it that far because we never do, but apparently this game has a lot going for it in those kind of you know moving you forward more than just like incremental changes. Like, I mean, some games don't really give you a lot more than higher numbers, but this game gives you like a lot more tools and different like vampire-esque powers and things throughout, I guess. I don't know. I've never really gotten too much about these games. I just know that they all have kind of like a huge legacy. And Legacy of Kain's Soul Reaver is like super anticipated for that remake that was announced. People have kind of been clamoring for that for years, and I think that kind of overshadows some of these like older PS1 titles in some people's minds. But I do know some people that absolutely love this game and even like it more than some of those later like Soul Reaver titles. So if you're looking for something kind of spooky but actiony and with a really good pedigree, I mean, this definitely seems like it's kind of an out of the park win.
Yeah, and you'd mentioned like the magic items and stuff. It's interesting how they're like, a limited amount, right? So it's like, okay, you want these blades that you can throw as a magic item. Well, that's one of, right? You have to continue collecting these, similar to health items, which are really just hearts. You just find hearts, and then it's like, cool, that's my health, right? Because you're a vampire in that case. So that was pretty interesting when it came to the mechanics, but also like the home component. Like just as you're progressing, you're like, oh man, my health is crap right now. I got to get back to like home base. Just like, all right, back to my tomb, essentially. Like, let me just warp over there. So I thought that was pretty cool too. In terms of the game being like forgiving or, not so forgiving, I felt it was pretty, I wouldn't say difficult, but it was like a medium type of difficulty, right? As we were progressing through, it didn't feel like it was like super easy as we're going through, but also didn't feel like it was like a Souls type game, right? Like it had a good pace to it, some good difficulty, enough items to pick up that you could replenish your blood and your HP essentially. And just that quick home-based mechanic component was nice as well to kind of refresh everything and set back down as needed.
I think it's
So.
cool how they have a lot of kind of vampire things that you don't really see mechanically represented in a lot of other games. So like you'll take damage if it's raining. You can't go out during the light. I mean, that's probably like the most common one that you're going to see in thing. But like the water damage and aversion to that is interesting to have in here. And just to have like kind of interactive day-night cycle and weather and things in a game from this era, it stands out as not something I really, remember being in a lot of games that I played back in the day.
And graphically, it's not a terrible game either. I mean, it is older, right? Like you said, it has like that top-down, like three-quarter type view tied to it. But I thought the graphics were pretty good. And I mean, we were playing it on a PS1 disc in a PS3 placed into a 4K OLED, right? I mean, it still looked great, regardless of the fact. And it'd probably look better if you had it, on a PS2 of component cables on a, CRTV. So I think, pending where you play it, you might have a, better or worse experience, but given what we played it on, can't get any worse than that, right? So, all right, jumping in some brass tacks on this one. Complete in box will run you $42.56. It peaked at $44.95. I didn't see a date here, so I don't know if you have
let me get that pulled back.
No, you're all good. I'll continue through, and then you can give us the dates here in a moment. Price on that is trending up though. A loose copy right now will run you $20. That peaked at $27.77, and that is trending down. Digital console, PlayStation Plus, by the end of 2024. I don't know what you're saying here, but yeah, you can buy it on digital console. And then you have digital PC is $6.99 on GOG and Steam.
So for digital console, it's coming to PS Plus by the end of 2024.
Okay,
it's not out yet, and it's not available outside of that anywhere at this time. But it has been announced in September, just without a date. And then for those peaks, the complete in box peaked in February of 22, and the loose peaked in September of 23.
Sounds good. Gotta love these one take podcast videos.
So $42.56 for Legacy of Kain.
Oh,
I mean, that's a hefty price compared to
I would agree.
some of the games we look at, but it does have a pretty good pedigree. This is one of those ones where it's like looking at the history. I mean, you used to be able to get this game for like $15, and now it's gone way up. Maybe, with the availability of PS Plus, if it's going to be available digitally after that, that might have some kind of effect. I would say I'll give it 30. I'd say 30 would be a good price.
All right, so you're at inflated.
I'm at inflated, and not because it maybe doesn't deserve it, just because it's just like, for me, I wouldn't pay, $45 for this.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's got, like you said, the pedigree. It's got the great reviews. Are there games that we've played that are potentially better and cheaper? I would say yes. I don't think I would see myself paying $42 for this. Now, if you are not a complete in box collector, $20 would honestly probably be a pretty good price for a loose copy right now. If you were looking to go that route, that's what I would suggest. If you really want to have it nice on a shelf, print out a PS2 size PS1 cover and custom and throw it on a shelf, right? If you want to go loose copy, but otherwise look for that on PlayStation Plus coming up by the end of the year. So really in the next couple months, yeah, right. Next couple months it'll be out, or $6.99 on Steam. Which honestly, a Steam route's probably the better way to go if you really just want to experience it. Cool.
Like people originally did, probably on the PC, but maybe not.
Probably on the PC, but maybe not. Yeah. So next week we're playing Paper Mario. Is it Sticker Star? Sticker Star.
Yeah.
I gotta find my copy. It's somewhere around the house.
Yeah, this has been one that has been on my list for a long time. So it'll be good to finally kind of talk about that.
I think my wife started it, but I don't think she finished it.
I think that's most people's experience with it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of this one, but we'll get into it some more next week.
All right, sounds good. Well, until then, this has been episode 311 of the Game Deflators podcast. Earlier, we were joined by Brian Riggsbee of RetroGameBooks.com, and thanks for listening.
Bye.